And thank you, Diana, for recording that. Okay, so for those of you just joining in, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Again, write your name in the chat box and your school of attendance just to see where all you folks are joining us today. And then you probably got that notice of the presentation being recorded. We will have that available for you all. And then we'll briefly go over the agenda and what you should be expecting for today. So we're just gonna give it maybe one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, and thank you, Jasmine, for writing that in the chat box too. Okay. So we have a good few amount of students. So while everybody else kind of trickles in, again, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have this presentation for you all, especially because we know, FAFSA is kicking up, deadlines are coming soon, right? So we want to make sure that you have all the information available to complete your FAFSA. So just know we will have the opportunity to ask brief questions at the end of the presentation. If you want to go ahead and write any questions in the chat box, feel free to do so. I know sometimes we can forget as we go through the information, right? But we will address those questions at the end of the presentation just to kind of be mindful of the time. Unfortunately, we won't be able to cover any DREAM Act, DACA, or AB 540 information as we mentioned in the email, right? But you're more than welcome to have your questions answered in the Q&A session that we're going to have towards the end by one of our counselors from Rancho Dominguez Prep, Mr. Viveros. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. So once again, welcome everybody. If you're just signing in, thank you for joining us. So today we're hosting a FAFSA workshop for you all because again, we know FAFSA is kicking up. If you haven't started your FAFSA, that's totally okay. Thank you for all of those who were honest in the registration form. We just wanted to see kind of where everybody is and how we can best help. So today we're going to go over a brief overview of what financial aid is, the different types of financial aid, but most importantly, we are going to go over the FAFSA, just go through each section and know what is the most important information to have and to fill out through the application. So just to introduce ourselves, my name is Diana Lasso. So I am a program specialist for ETS. I've served as a college advisor at Gardena High School, but I've also helped out other schools like Rancho Dominguez, Bell, Linwood, and HP. And so I'm also going to have two other ETS staff facilitate with me today. So I have Sienna and Jocelyn. So if you guys want to introduce yourselves to students.
Yeah, my name's Sienna, Sienna Bush, and I've worked for ETS for 3 years now. Previously, I was the advisor at Dominguez High School, and now I'm one of the program specialists as well. Let me see what else. I went to Cal State Long Beach, and yeah, if you have any questions like towards the end, we can answer those or give you like even our own personal experiences.
Hi, everyone. Glad you all joined us today. My name is Jocelyn Garcia, and like Diana and Sienna, I'm also a program specialist. I've used to be a college advisor at Compton High, and I've also helped with Centennial and all of our Compton schools. So I'm looking forward to giving some more information to you all today.
Awesome. And so we also have our program coordinators who will be joining us and just helping us facilitate, so maybe answering some questions as well. So don't worry, we do have a lot of staff here and also probably some college advisors as well joining in case you all have any questions. So just a little bit of the agenda of how today's going to go. We're going to briefly do like a financial aid overview as far as like what is financial aid, the different types of financial aid, right? Then we'll do the FAFSA walkthrough. So we'll actually show you, each section of the FAFSA and, what the questions that are going to ask you and how you can kind of go ahead and answer those. Any next steps, so what you should be concerned with after you complete your FAFSA and really anything that's kind of pending and you need to have completed. Financial aid timeline. So this is a great resource that we at ETS have created for you all to know like what you should be focusing on regarding with FAFSA for each month of your senior year, right? Then we'll have some frequently asked questions. So these are just questions that we got based on your Google registration forms, right? So some of you asked very great questions that I felt really needed to be addressed. And then as well, that'll kind of lead us into our Q&A session. So we'll address any questions that you guys might have. And then we'll just have a few closing final remarks as far as like if kind of what you need to do in reaching out with your ETS advisors. So without further ado, let's get started. So Jocelyn, if you want to take it away with explaining what financial aid is.
Yeah, thank you, Diana. So first things first, we're going to be going through a lot of terms. I'll try to explain it as easy as possible. I know some of these terms you might have come across oftentimes with your college advisor, with your ETS college advisor, or maybe with your counselors. So first things first, what is financial aid? Financial aid is money that is given, paid, or loaned to you by the state, federal government, college, or private scholarship to help pay for college. So financial aid is basically considered any money that is going to be provided to you, whether it be free money or loans that you eventually have to pay back. And this money helps you pay for school. And then if we can move on to the next slide so we can kind of discuss the different types of financial aid. So there are 4 different types of financial aid that you all may be eligible for and you might qualify. There's, for example, we're talking about FAFSA, and FAFSA is very important for you to complete in order to qualify for some of this aid. So if you apply to FAFSA before the priority deadline, which is March 2nd, you more or less will be granted or be eligible to receive more financial aid. So first off, we have grants, as you can see, we're going to start from the left. Grants are basically free money awarded to you to qualifying students. So there's a lot of requirements to apply or to qualify for a grant, but the most common awarded grant is Cal Grant. Usually you'll see this like in your financial aid award, and we'll be talking more about that later on. And then next we do have scholarships. So this is also free money awarded to students who apply. There are various scholarships out there. So I know for a lot of people, there's scholarships for maybe being a first generation college student or for being for having good grades. You just have to look out for those scholarships. Some very, very important and good service that your ETS advisors do have. I'm pretty sure you are all familiar if you're in ETS. You get a scholarship list, right? Every single month. Usually the scholarship list has so many different scholarship opportunities that you can apply for, whether you're a senior or you're a freshman. So these are great opportunities to take advantage. Again, it is free money that eventually, if you do get a scholarship, it would be sent to your school, or you might be even able to get the check yourself, a personal check, and use that for school expenses. So third off, we also have loans. Loans is money that needs to be repaid. So I know getting loans is sometimes scary. A lot of people don't like getting loans because they know you have to repay that money. But if you do apply for FAFSA, you may qualify for federal loans that are usually low interest or no interest at all. So for example, we have the most common federal loans that are subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So if you accept a subsidized loan, you usually do not get, or you won't get an interest rate while you're in school. So you get your time during college and 6 months after you graduate to pay off this loan with no interest. So let's say I get out a subsidized loan of $3,000, I will only have to pay $3,000 back. That's what no interest means. On the other hand, if I do accept an unsubsidized loan, that means the interest is going to start accumulating. However, if it comes from FAFSA, usually you get less interest. So if I, again, maybe get $3,000 in loans, I might have to pay a little bit over $3,000, but usually unsubsidized loans have lower interest rates than getting a private loan. So that's something to keep in mind. I know, again, it might be scary, but at some point you might have to get a loan if it means investing in your education. And if you want to stay on campus, just think about it as an investment, right? Something I do like to share, it's like, let's say I'm going to buy a car, I'm going to get a loan for a car, I'm investing because I want something, right? So let's think of it as your education as well. I'm investing it, or you're going to be investing in your education by probably getting the loan that in the long run you might have to pay, well, you will have to pay back. And then lastly, we do have work study, which allows you to find a job on campus. And your work study is paid through you as you work throughout the semester. So work study jobs can be very, very flexible. I know, I think Diana had mentioned previously that she had a work study job. These are jobs, since they're on campus, usually the employers are very flexible. So you might even be able to do your homework if you don't have anything to do during your job, right? So that's super flexible, rather you having a job outside of campus that may require more time or may require more commitment. So that's something to keep in mind. And I know this handout should have been sent out to you along with the email that you received from Diana earlier. Again, it just explains every single thing that I talked about, from scholarships all the way to loans. So if you need to refer back to it, you can always look at this handout, and it gives a breakdown as to what each financial type of financial aid is. Okay, we're going to move on to calculating financial aid eligibility. So when calculating financial aid eligibility, the financial aid office starts by deciding upon your cost of attendance at the school, and then they consider your expected family contribution. So we're going to go more into what is cost of attendance and what is expected family contribution. So your cost of attendance, you just think about it as having to pay, or the cost of your tuition, your fees. So tuition is basically your classes, right? How much does my class cost? That's your tuition. Your fees usually may consist of campus fees, so maybe the facility fee, or maybe like student body fee, right? So at high school, it's called ASB. So usually we have that at the college level. So usually it does include some of those fees along with your cost of attendance. It can also include room and board, which is like your dorm, your meal plan, and all that stuff, your cost of books, your supplies, pencils, pens, whatever it is that you're going to need, transportation, especially if you're going to be commuting, you have to take in consideration that you will be driving to campus and you will have to pay for gas, right? So that's, again, it can be considered in the cost of attendance, and other miscellaneous expenses. So usually if you go to school, if you go to college, you're going to need a computer, especially now with everything happening, right? So maybe you're going to invest in a new computer. Again, that can be considered in your cost of attendance. On the other hand, your EFC, or your expected family contribution, is simply an index number that the college financial aid staff or office, they determine to use to figure out how much money you're going to get, how much financial aid you're going to receive if you were to attend their school. So the EFC is calculated according to a formula that considers factors such as family tax and untaxed income, assets and benefits. So it may be benefits like unemployment or social security. And keep in mind that the EFC number is not definite amount. Like, this is not saying your parents or your family has to pay this money, but rather the number is a starting point. And that's where the financial aid office kind of determines how much grant money you need, or how much financial aid in general you're going to need. So this is a way that they calculate your financial need. So if you look at the screen, we have costs of attendance. So remember, all the costs of your tuition, your fees, your books, everything, minus the expected family contribution. With usually, if you fill out the FAFSA, at the end, it'll kind of give you like a rough estimate of your EFC. And then this is, again, they determine these numbers, or they use these numbers to determine your financial need for the year. So they calculate it for the school year. Keep in mind that this is only for, if you're applying right now, you're going to start fall 2021, that's freshman year. Next year, you're going to have to fill out FAFSA again. So you're going to do another process of applying for FAFSA, and it's going to be probably a different cost of attendance or different expected family contribution, depending on how much your parents make for their income.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the documents that you actually need to fill out the FAFSA. So first, you want to start off with the documents and the year. So the correct year for you all would be 2021 to 2022. So when you're actually going to the website to do your application, just make sure that's the right year, because the document year, or like the tax forms that you'll need, it'll change every year based on which FAFSA you're filling out. So in order to complete the 2021 to 2022 school year FAFSA, you're going to need your social security number. And please make sure that it's correct, because a lot of times applications such as like your college applications or your financial aid applications, they use it to link your accounts or to link your applications together. So just make sure that it's correct, and we highly recommend that you memorize it, because you're going to need it pretty much for the rest of your life. Also, your permanent resident number if you are not a U.S. citizen. So either one of those, and then your parent's social security number. So that's only if they have one. If your parent does not have one, then we'll talk about the steps that you're going to have to take afterwards if they do not have one. But if they do have one, please have that available. Then your parents' birth dates, the date of your parents, if they were either married or divorced, legally separated, or became a widow, you're going to need the dates of those. So most times, like the month and the year, if you can't get like the exact date. And then they're also going to, or you're also going to need your federal tax forms, or your parents' federal tax forms. So like the IRS 1040 form or the 2019 W-2 forms for the year of 2019. So if you have like a job or when your parents have a job, these are forms that they will receive for their taxes. So they'll know what you're talking about, like if you ask them for this, but just make sure that you have all the pages of both of those. Because for example, like the IRS 1040 form, it is a few pages long. So you want to make sure you have all of it and just not like the first or the second one. And then also records of untaxed income from 2019. So if you are getting like Social Security benefits, welfare benefits, disability, child support, veterans benefits, any of that information we're going to need as well for the FAFSA. And then lastly, any information on like savings, investments for yourself and for your parents. So your savings and your checking account balances. And those amounts are the amounts for yourself and your parent after like any bills have been paid. And just make sure that you have all of this. If you still are confused about it, you can either talk to your parents or your ETS advisor, and they can tell you like which form or which what's the difference between like a 1040 form and a W-2 form. And all this information will also be confidential or kept confidential, so you don't have to worry about it like, being shared with anyone. Everything on your FAFSA will be kept in your FAFSA application, and it won't be put out into anything but like your financial aid offices so that they can give you a financial aid package. All right, so here's the actual FAFSA homepage. So once you go into like, say you search from Google and you want to start your FAFSA, you'll go ahead and start with studentaid.gov. So that would be the website, or you can just type in FAFSA if you want. Either way, this page, so the first screenshot will pop up. So this is the overall homepage for FAFSA. And you can see that there's two different buttons. So the first button is for people who are just now starting the FAFSA application. So it'll say start here. And then the second blue button is log in for people who are returning to complete the FAFSA application. Under those blue buttons, you'll see like different announcements. So just make sure to like read over those. And then at the bottom are different links to get like an estimate if you need FAFSA help. And then there's another link for steps after you complete your FAFSA application. So once you click on, for those who are starting a new one, if you haven't started already, you'll click on start here. Once you click on start here, they're going to ask you if you're the student or the parent. So you'll click I'm the student, and then they will direct you to a different page where you're going to have to create an FSA ID. So an FSA ID is pretty much a username and a password that gives you access to like your federal student aid and the online system. And then that's going to serve as pretty much like your legal signature. So your legal electronic signature when filling out anything that has to do with like federal student aid. So here in the top screenshot, it says like create your FSA ID and username. So what you're gonna have to do is the first step into your login information. So you have to provide like your email, you have to create a unique username and password, and then you have to verify that you're at least 13 years or older. Once you do that, you'll press continue. So then once you press continue, you have to enter personal information such as like your social security number again, your name, date of birth. You have to include your mailing address, telephone number, and then your language preference. And then for security purposes, they do ask you to provide answers to 5 challenge questions. So like, what was your mother's maiden name, or what was your elementary school? Just so like if you forget your password, you can have a way to recover it. Now, when it comes to social security numbers, again, we kind of talked about this in the beginning, but your parents must create a FSA ID. If you have like older siblings or your parents have done this before, they might have like a FSA ID for your siblings, so they would just use the same one. If they do not have an FSA ID, or if they do not have a social security number, excuse me, then they would not create an FSA ID because it won't allow them to. So in that case, they're going to have to do something where we call it a print signature page. So we'll talk about that in the end. They'll print the signature page, which is their like signature. So you'll have an electronic signature, but they'll actually have to print it and sign it themselves and then physically mail it in. So don't worry about it. If they don't have a social security number, it's okay. There's just a different, like an alternative way of them doing this process. So then at the end, you'll submit your FSA ID information. You'll agree, like every website pretty much has like terms and conditions. You'll agree to that. And then you're just going to verify your email address and your username and then use that to log in. So then the last, here you can see in the corner, the last screenshot is for a save key. And a save key is pretty much just like a 4-digit code that you'll use to log into your application and start like where you left off. So say you started the application, but you saved it and you want to come back to it, you'll just create the save key so you can type in the numbers.
Wait, was
So,
that
like,
Jurassic Park?
hello. Uh, so you'll just like type in the numbers. So like mine might be 1444. I'll just type in the numbers twice and then it'll return me to where I left off. All right, so the next part is student demographics. And this is really important because all this information needs to be very accurate. So pretty much student demographics asks for the information that's listed here. So once again, your name, your social security number, your residency, and just to go back to your name, you wanna make sure that when you put your name, you wanna use whatever's on your social security number, your social security card or your birth certificate. So if you go by, say you go by DJ, but your name is really like Danny, right? You need to put Danny and not DJ, or say that you have two last names and those are on your birth certificate and your social security card, you have to put both of your last names. So just make sure that you do that. The social security information also needs to match the FAFSA. Otherwise, it might cause like a delay in your application process. So just make sure that you put the accurate one. And then when it comes to residency, they're going to ask if you lived in California for the past 5 years. Sometimes they do recommend to make sure, like if you have a driver's license, to put the driver's license because that helps establish residency. Or you could just answer it because that part is optional. So then you also have to include your phone number and your email. And you want to make sure that these are accurate. So like if you use your email for your school, we highly recommend that you don't use your school email and use a personal email. So some students, they'll even create an email for like college things only or anything college related, they'll use that email. But don't use your school one because after you graduate, you will not have access to that email. And then same for your parents. They're going to ask for their email. You want to make sure that theirs is accurate and that they're checking it often because the schools and FAFSA will use the phone number, the email to contact you. And then your marital status. So most of you probably aren't married, but they still want to know. So you'll either put single, married, or divorced. They're going to want to know about your citizenship status, and then high school completion and status of when you're entering college. So for most of you, actually all of you, you'll probably put no for this. For high school completion, you'll put that you completed high school with a high school diploma, but then you'll put no for the never attended college. So this will be your first time attending college. So you want to put that you're a first year and you're getting your first bachelor's degree. So even though maybe some of you did like dual enrollment or you took, community college classes, this is your first time at a 4-year, like attending and taking classes at a 4-year university or at a community college. So just make sure that you put what we have here highlighted, never attended college / first year, and then you're getting your first bachelor's degree. And then for work study, Jocelyn described what work study is. So we highly recommend that you put yes for work study, even if you're maybe not going to do it. It's always good to put yes just in case you change your mind. And then towards the end, they ask about if there's been any time since you turned 13 that you were in the foster youth or foster care system. So this can be due to like adoption, reunification, if you reach the age of the majority age, which is 18 years old, or if both of your parents were deceased. So you'll either put yes or no. And then lastly, they want to know about your parents' education status and completion. So if your parents went to high school or college, if they completed, like if they graduated with a high school diploma, if they got their associate's degree, or if they went in higher education and got like maybe a master's or something. So you can just ask them about that if you don't know yourself. And then the last thing is to note that all of this needs to be accurate because sometimes they do ask for documentation to prove that the information was accurate. So, yeah. And then next is school selection. So with school selection, the first screenshot, you'll see that they ask about your high school. So you're gonna wanna put the name of your high school, then you have to put the city your high school is located in, and then the state that it's located in. Then you're gonna you're gonna press search. And once you press search, there'll probably be like a list because some schools do have similar names or the same name. So just make sure that you click your right high school. So for this case, I think I put like Compton High School, searched it, we clicked it, and then you will move on to the next section. So the next section will actually ask you about your colleges that you're interested in. So say that you have a list of, say you have a list of 15 colleges, right? And you're going to start by putting the colleges in your application by answering the first question. So I can't really read it, but I know that it asks if you have like the school code. Most of you probably won't have the school code. So what you can do is just enter it manually. So you'll put like the state and the location, so like the city of the school. And for this instance, I'm trying to look up Cal State University Long Beach. So I just typed it in and then I'll press search. Once I press search, you'll move on to the third screenshot. Well, it'll give you a list of colleges in that area. So like the Long Beach, California area, and then it'll have like the federal school code next to it. So that's why I put the little check mark that's black. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's, yeah, thank you. The little black check mark. And then once you press the check mark, it'll ask you to select that school, add it to your list, and then go to next. Now, if you want to just continue adding your schools, then you can do that. And then you can add up to 10 at a time. So like I said, if you have a list of 15 schools, you can add the first 10, submit your application. Once you submit the application, you can go back after your application's been processed successfully and then add the other 5 and submit it again. So I know that probably sounds like a lot, but don't worry. Like your ETS advisor will walk you through that process. But just know that your limit for the first time is 10, and then you can go back and add more. And then also, when you're adding your schools, they're going to ask you about like your housing status. So if you're going to live on campus, off campus, or at home. I know in the past I've recommended my students to put that they're going to live on campus, but if you know for sure like you're going to live at home and you want to put that, you can also put that. So it really just depends on you. But I think we've been taught that like if you put that you're going to live on campus, sometimes you might get a little bit more financial aid. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, so now we're going to go on to the dependency status section. So as part of the FAFSA, students must submit parent guardian information if they're considered a dependent student. So unless these following statements apply to you, then you are considered a dependent student. And so I'm going to go through each different statement and kind of what that means. So the first one is just if you as a student are currently serving on active duty in armed forces for purposes other than training, right? If you are a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, for the most part, the students that we work with are not part of the armed forces, so don't have to worry about that. At any time since you have turned 13, both parents are deceased in foster care, or you yourself are a dependent or ward of the court. And that just means if you are under the protection of the courts, right? Then we have, as determined by a court in the state of legal residence, you are considered an emancipated minor. And so emancipated minor just basically means a minor who assumes most adult responsibilities before they turn 18. Then we have somebody other than parent or step parent that has legal guardianship as determined by a court in the state of legal residency. So that's really key that they have legal guardianship. And then the last one is just homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. And so FAFSA defines homelessness as someone who is lacking fixed, regular, or adequate housing. So this can include living in shelters, parks, motels, cars, or just temporary living with other folks. So a student can be considered independent if they are considered a homeless and accompanied youth, but usually this is going to require some documentation from either your school or your school district's homeless liaison, which every school has. So it's just important to know you might need assistance with that documentation if this is your special circumstance. So again, if none of these apply to you, then you are considered a dependent student. And so part of the dependency status, they will also ask if a student has a dependent themselves. So if a student has a child, maybe a spouse or somebody else who lives with them and they receive more than half of their support. So they would note that here as yes, or they'll also ask household size and the number of students in college that the student themselves are in charge of, right? So part of that dependency status. Then we do have sometimes some circumstances where, let's say, for example, you know that you are a dependent, but you are unable to provide parental information. So sometimes the general rule is that the federal law does allow for special circumstances in some cases. Generally, colleges have that authority to override the federal dependency status, right? But it's not necessarily an obligation. This is really just based on a case-by-case status, and it varies from college to college. So just to kind of break down a little bit of what that special circumstances are, usually FAFSA will define a special circumstance as either student's parents being incarcerated, if a student has left home due to an abusive family environment, if they don't know where their parents are and they cannot contact them and they also haven't been adopted, that would be a type of special circumstance, right? But the following reasons are not necessarily considered special circumstances due to FAFSA. So this will also be things like if you don't live with your parents, but you are still considered a dependent student, right? If your parents don't provide you with financial support, if your parents refuse to contribute to your college expenses, or maybe that's a conversation that you have had with your parents, right? If they don't claim you as a dependent on their taxes, or they generally just don't want to provide information on your FAFSA, these are not necessarily considered special circumstances. So know that this is on a case-by-case basis. So what's going to happen is you are going to click on I am unable to provide information about my parent, and on the next window, FAFSA will show you, these are the considered special circumstances. These are not considered special circumstances. So if you know that yours falls under that special circumstances I described, you should contact the school of choice right away where you are considering going, whether this be a community college or once you get your admissions decisions from schools, to kind of get that process early of the documentation that you'll be needed. You can still get that FAFSA process, just know that it's going to have more kind of documentation and things that they're going to need from you to really verify that kind of status. But let's say, for example, you are a student who you're not part of the special circumstances, but you just can't get that information. You are just going to need to, again, provide additional documentation to whatever school you decide to go to's financial aid office. But this will influence the kind of aid that you'll be able to get. Sometimes students have holds because your FAFSA isn't technically processed because of that missing parent information. So know that it is going to be a little bit more of a hurdle. But again, always talk to a financial aid advisor at whatever school you're going to, even advisor, so that we can kind of assist you if this is your circumstance. So again, if this is you, know that it is your responsibility to kind of follow up with the college of your choice regarding that financial aid process. And so you guys also got this flyer in your emails about who is considered a parent for FAFSA purposes. So here I like this explanation that they have of who is a parent. So here it has your legal, either biological or adoptive parent or step parent, or a person that the state has determined to be your legal parent. So that is who you're going, that is our conditions of who you need to report for FAFSA. And this chart is very easy to follow. I like to use this with students when we're not sure about who necessarily to report, maybe like step parents or anything like that, right? So let's say, for example, just to kind of flow through the chart, I know that my parents are married to each other, so obviously I'm going to report both information of my parents on the FAFSA. But let's say, for example, my parents are not married to each other and they do live with each other. So here I could just report both parents' information. I would just either note if they were never married, divorced, or separated, or let's say they're not married to each other, they don't live with each other. but maybe I live with with one parent over the other parent, more than the other parent in the last 12 months. So here it's going to tell you to report information on the FAFSA for the parent that you lived with more. And let's say, for example, that's my mom, right? But maybe my mom remarried. So if she did remarry, then I would have to put that step parent. If she didn't, then you wouldn't. So it kind of flows in that way. And the very last option is, let's say your parents are not married to each other, they don't live together, you haven't lived with one more than the other, maybe they have split custody. So here it tells you to report information on the FAFSA for the parent who provided more financial support over the last 12 months. So maybe if one provides more financial support than the other, then it would tell you to kind of follow here in the chart. So again, very simple and kind of easy to follow. If you ever just have any questions about who necessarily counts, you can always ask your ETS advisor, or just even people at the financial aid office have been very helpful in that regard as well. But here it specifically says the following people are not your parents unless they have legally adopted you. And this could be a widowed step parent, grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, older brothers or sisters, or aunts or uncles. So I know it's kind of an in-depth about who is technically your parent on the FAFSA purposes, but it's really important that you kind of go through and verify of, okay, I need to input this parent or this parent's information.
Okay, so we're going to move on to parent demographics now that Diana kind of explained whose information you're going to be providing. So for the most part, if you know you're dependent and you live with either mom or dad or both, then you have to be aware that you're going to have to put their information on the FAFSA, and some of the information that you are going to need. So if you do plan on getting started with FAFSA soon, which we hope that you are planning on doing, or even meeting with your ETS advisor, it's very important that you already have this information handy. It just makes the process go by way quicker. Once you get to the parent demographics slide, you're going to see it's going to ask a question as of today. What is your parents' marital status, right? So marital status is, the options are going to vary from, are they married or remarried? Are they divorced or separated? Are they single? Have they never married, or are they widowed? Once you answer that question, if they are married or remarried, they're going to ask, when did they get married? So that's information that you will have to get from your parents. Make sure you ask for the month and the year. You don't need the specific date, but let's say your parents got married August 2003, then you just put 08-2003. And then after you put that information, it is going to ask for more extensive parent information. And some of the information that it's going to require is for you to provide their social security number. This information, if your parent does not have a social security number, you do not have to worry. All you do is, instead of adding a social security number on there, you're just going to add all zeros. So you're going to put 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's only if your parent does not have a social security. If your parent does have a social security number, you have to make sure that you get that information from them. You're also gonna need their first and last name. For their last name, you can put the entire last name. For the first name, you're only gonna put their first initial. You don't need to put the entire name. And then their date of birth. So you need their full date of birth, the month, the date, and the year. And you need to have this information for both your parents if you are reporting both parents. And then there'll be an additional slide after that asking for household size. Here, you're going to see in the gray boxes that the application itself is already going to generate some numbers for you depending on what you have answered. So if you put that your parents are married, it's automatically going to add that you have 2 parents, and it's going to add you. On the second gray box is going to say 1, and that's counting yourself. On that third box, you're going to put any sibling that lives at home or any of your other parents' children that may not live at home, but that your parents provide more than 50% of financial support for them. So let's say I live with my brother and sister, and my parents provide financial support for them. Then on that third box, I'm going to put 2 for my brother and my sister. And then on that fourth box, you're going to add any other people that your parents also contribute money for, like they financially support. So sometimes I know maybe grandma or grandpa live at home and your parents are basically supporting them financially, then you might be able to add them as well. That last gray box all the way to the bottom, it's already gonna, sorry, not the one above it. It's already gonna generate the entire number based on what you put. So if there's 2 parents and there's myself and my 2 siblings, it's gonna generate 5 people in my household, or whatever number that you put on there. It's just going to generate it on your own. On that last box with number in college, you're going to put how many people in your household are going to college. So if you're the first one in your family to go to college, you're just going to pick one for yourself. Maybe you have an older sibling that goes to college currently, then you can add them on there. So it's going to be 2. And it's asking for people in college coming in 2021 and July 2021, sorry, I can't see, and July 2022. So between those dates. Okay, we're gonna move on to the financial information. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because the FAFSA does ask for a lot of information. I'm just gonna kind of run through what specific information and documents you're gonna need in order to complete the FAFSA. So most importantly, you're gonna need your 2019 tax return. So this is information that you're gonna request from your parent or your guardian. Make sure you have this information handy when you complete the FAFSA. So what tax form was filed? Most commonly, most people file the 1040. There might be instances where your parents may file a 1099. Just make sure you verify what tax form is filed, because on the FAFSA, you're gonna get those options. It's gonna ask what income tax return was filed. If you already know it's the IRS 1040, then that's what you're gonna select on the application. Something to also have in handy is the W-2 forms. This is basically if both mom and dad work or your guardians work, they're going to have a W-2 form that basically shows how much they made in 2019. This comes in handy because, again, the FAFSA does ask for wages and salaries, and it just makes it a lot easier. If you have both parents and both of them have a W-2 form, we can just refer to that and put that income onto the FAFSA. Also have any information on untaxed income, so such as disability benefits, alimony, unemployment payments, or anything like that. Or maybe your parents have a side business and they do not report that to the taxes. That's where the Schedule 1 also comes in. There's a question on the FAFSA that's going to say, do your parents report at Schedule 1? If you know your parents have any untaxed income or maybe a business, then they more or less do have a Schedule 1. If you're unsure and your parents probably are unsure, I usually tell students to go through that whole packet and just look for a page that says Schedule 1. It usually says it like on the top left-hand corner. You're going to see Schedule 1. If you see that it's on that tax packet, then you just put yes to that question. And then you also should be submitting additional assets or providing information on additional assets. So any amounts, if you know your parents have more savings or maybe investment, real estate investment, or they have multiple properties to report, you have to gather all this information because you are going to report it if you know your parents have it. If you know that your parents probably don't have any additional assets, then you might be able to skip that and just put no for that question. Towards the end, it's going to ask for student tax information. This is usually if you yourself reports taxes. For the most part, you might not have reported taxes. So you just put that you didn't file taxes. And there's an option that's going to say they're not going to file. And everything else that it asks after that question, it's just going to be 0 unless you worked, which if you're putting that you're not going to file, odds are that you probably didn't work. If you did work, how much did you earn? How much were your working wages? I remember this is just 2019 information. So if you didn't work in 2019, there's no reason for you to add more income information on there. And then we're going to move on. So I just added some screenshots here to make it a little bit easier when you're completing the financial information portion of the FAFSA. So again, since you're going to need the parent tax information, and like I mentioned earlier, you need the 2019 taxes, and you're going to put on the FAFSA, yes, my parents already completed. And there's going to be an option that says already completed 2019 taxes. And if you have the 1040, that's how the 1040 is going to look. And it has to say 2019 as well. So if they have the 2019, great, you're going to put that they already completed. The FAFSA is also going to ask for their filing status. If you go to the 1040 form, and I don't know if you guys can see that circled portion there, usually there's a little X inside of either one of those boxes, which shows if they filed single, head of household, married, filed jointly, and so forth. Remember, just look at the one that's checked off, and that's what you're going to put on your FAFSA. If they filed single, then put that on there. If they filed head of household, put that on there. There's also something called the IRS data retrieval tool, which if you already started your FAFSA, you might have been familiarized with this. I'm going to refer to it as a DRT, but basically the IRS data retrieval tool is a tool that allows FAFSA to get the information directly from the IRS page and transfer it onto your FAFSA. It's a really neat thing to do just because that information, we already know that it's going to be accurate. And when you do this, it's less likely that you're going to get flagged or verified because of once FAFSA receives your application, they're going to know, okay, you submitted from the IRS retrieval tool, so you probably have all that information correct. So if it does give you the option to do it, we highly encourage you to do it because it's just going to save a lot of time, considering that it's going to transfer all your income and all your parents' income information and additional asset information onto that FAFSA application. So in order for you to use the DRT, your parents must have an FSA ID. I know we talked about creating an FSA ID earlier. If your parents have a Social Security, like Sienna said, then your parents can create an FSA ID. And once they do have an FSA ID, you can log in and it's going to take you directly to the DRT, to the IRS page. If your parent cannot create a FSA ID because they don't have a social or for other reasons, then unfortunately you won't be able to use the DRT and you will have to enter all your income information manually. So again, like I said, you're not eligible if your parent doesn't have an SSN or if you're a married student and a parent who filed as married filing separately or head of household. These are a little bit more complex circumstances that if you're not sure what this means as filed as married filing separately or head of household, it's very important that you reach out to your college advisor just because we'll be able to walk you through what you have more specifically.
Okay, so next is when you get to the prepare info. So pretty much a prepare is someone who is paid a fee to provide like personal help or advice in completing the FAFSA. So this is not you, this is not your parent, this is somebody else. So we are your ETS advisors, we are not preparers either. So most of you, if not all of you, will put no for this. Then you'll press next, and once you press next, it'll show you the FAFSA summary. So pretty much this is like a review of everything that you've inputted into the application. So we highly recommend that you go over, you just see like a clip of it, but you'll go over the whole thing. So it's just like a list of the questions and a list of your responses and review this very thoroughly so that you can ensure that everything is correct. And then once you review it, then you can go ahead and submit it. So here is where you would sign and submit your application. So here are the terms and agreements, like the terms and conditions. So you have to make sure to read over this. Once you read over it, then you'll press agree and then next, and then you go over to the other screenshot. And this is where you actually do that electric or electronic signing. So if you did create an FSA ID, which all of you will, you'll go ahead, it'll have like your social security number, your last name and your date of birth, and it'll say like sign and it'll say signed electronically. So that'll be for you with your FSA ID. And if your parent was able to create one, they'll do the same thing. Now, if your parent was not able to create one because they did not have a social, it'll give you an option to print a page, and then that page will print. Your parent will sign it. Once they sign it, they have to mail it. So it'll tell you the address, the directions, everything that you need to do to be able to mail it in. But just remember to select that option for your parent if they do not have a social. And make sure that when you print it out and you sign it, have your parents sign it, that you guys send it off as soon as possible, because that can also delay your whole FAFSA process. So once you sign, submit it, do all of that, whether you signed electronically or signed it through paper and mailed it off, then you're going to get a confirmation page. So this confirmation page will have your confirmation number. It'll have the next steps that you need to do, and then your college information. So based on the colleges that you put on your FAFSA, it will give you like the list of them and then some information for each one. and then your eligibility information. And then here it says like if there is an asterisk, so that little like star behind your EFC number, so your estimated family contribution, that means that your FAFSA was selected for verification. If that's the case, you're probably just gonna have to go through some extra steps and get maybe some documents to send to like your financial aid office. Something to also keep in mind before Diana talks about this is that when you get your confirmation page, you want to send that to your ETS advisor, and then once you get your process successfully page, so you'll get that maybe like 3 to 5 days after you submit your FAFSA, you want to also send that to your ETS advisor. So it'll be like emails, you'll just forward it to your ETS advisor.
Okay, thank you, Sienna. So yeah, that's basically a general run through of the FAFSA application. Again, and we know that it's very brief and kind of step by step because again, it is very individualized. Sometimes some of you might have different circumstances, but nonetheless, these are just generally things that you want to keep in mind after you submit your FAFSA. So the first thing is that you can always go back and make corrections if necessary. So this is kind of what Sienna was saying. After you submit and a few days after that, you get a process successfully email, then that is when you can go back and make corrections. So you can add those extra schools, or maybe something happened with like you didn't add your second last name or something. You can always, again, go back and make those corrections and make sure you do that by March 2nd. So once your FAFSA has been also processed successfully, you can create your web grants account. So I know we briefly talked about grants, but specifically web grants is for Cal Grants. So maybe your college counselors or your ETS advisors have mentioned to you already about the Cal Grant. So it's basically another type of free money that you're going to be able to get based on your GPA and your family's financial information. And so if you need a little bit more information about the different types of Cal Grants and all that stuff, that's kind of best to talk to your ETS advisor so they can individually say, hey, this is the type of Cal Grant that you're going to get. Some of you, if you have already submitted your FAFSA, you might have already gotten an email or something in the mail about your web grants account. Don't worry, this is something that you're going to be able to do, but of course, after your FAFSA is processed successfully. And then some students are selected for verification through FAFSA. So this is what Sienna again was saying about, it's basically just a process that FAFSA undergoes through sometimes a random set of students to make sure that the information that they reported on FAFSA was accurate. So this is just maybe more additional documents that you need to submit about either your household or your parents' taxes, or maybe if you reported that you worked, they need some information on that. So it's just important to follow up with any of those additional documents that a school will request. Sometimes they will let you know through email or through your portal. So just keep that in mind. And then also know where to request IRS tax transcripts if requested. So the IRS tax transcript is kind of like a receipt of your parents' taxes from the IRS. That's kind of how I like to refer to it as. So if you need, let's say, for example, you were selected for verification and they ask for a tax transcript, all you need to do is go to the IRS website and you can click on getting an IRS tax transcript for your parents, either by online or mail. Doing it online is very simple. You just need to get your parents' information. So just know that if that's something that's coming up, you can request that online. And then just generally as a rule of thumb, remember to check your portals for each university because they may be requesting additional information, especially for FAFSA. So I know sometimes Dominguez Hills, just for example, they do request sometimes some students additional financial aid information. So I always like to have students get into the habit of checking that sort of stuff. So as a general rule, if let's say that anything that I mentioned you maybe aren't sure about, or you get an email requesting something about financial aid and you're not too sure what that means, don't be afraid to reach out to your ETS advisor or anyone who can assist you to kind of see what additional steps you need to get that cleared.
And then just to keep you all on track, we did provide you with a financial aid timeline. So I'm just going to talk about half of it and then Jocelyn will talk about the other half. So most of this stuff, or at least half of it, has already passed, right? So in August and September, you should have been getting like really organized, maybe collecting the documents that you need to fill out your FAFSA, and then also speaking with your ETS advisor, which we're hoping is something you do regularly. In October, this is actually really important because on October 1st, every year the FAFSA opens on the same date, which is October 1st. And you want to make sure of that because every year, while you're in college, no matter what college you're attending, you do have to resubmit the FAFSA. So if you know it opens October 1st every year, it's like a reminder to just get it done and get it over with. So just make sure that you do that. In October, you should have also applied to your colleges. And if you haven't yet, because you're applying to like community college, that's fine too. But for like CSUs, UCs, privates, maybe you probably would have applied back then. Then in November and December, you're going to continue to work on your FAFSA if you haven't submitted it already. Also, scholarship applications. So every month we do send you all a scholarship list. And then the CSS profile if you're planning on attending like private universities that require the CSS profile. And then right now, so in January and February, you should be completing your FAFSA once again if you haven't done it already, submitting any additional forms or documentation like Diana talked about, maybe being in contact with your financial aid office if you have any questions or your ETS advisor, and then ordering those tax transcripts that she mentioned, and creating your CalGrant account once again.
So once we move on to March, an important date to mark on your calendars is March 2nd, because that is a priority deadline to apply for FAFSA. It doesn't mean that you can't apply for FAFSA after March 2nd, but March 2nd, if you want to be considered for those grants, that free money that we were talking about earlier, your FAFSA should be submitted before March 2nd. So just make sure you mark your calendar. If you've already started, great. The sooner you turn it in, the better. Also, around March and April, you're going to begin receiving financial aid award letters. Your financial aid award letters are basically what's going to be posted on your portal to show how much money each individual school is going to provide to you. And it's going to include any grants, any other free money, scholarships, or even loans, including work study. So it's a lot of the stuff that we already discussed earlier. So you want to make sure you're constantly checking those portals. Around this time, you should also already be thinking about what school you want to attend. So maybe what school you're going to commit to. You should already start viewing your options in around March, probably April more so, when you start receiving all the schools' acceptances or news from admissions. You want to start deciding what college you're going to attend, while taking into consideration your financial aid award letters. So again, financial aid award letter is how much money each individual school is going to provide to you. So you want to take into consideration, maybe one school is providing you more money than the other. That's something that you want to take in mind, right? And also you want to continue checking your to-do list on your portal. Like Sienna was talking about, creating your web grants and everything else that comes with verification, with the IRS tax transcripts that Diana did mention. In order to figure out whether you have to do any of that stuff, you should be checking your to-do list on your portal, because they'll let you know what you need to do. If you need to send in verification forms, usually they'll post it on the portal. They'll guide you through which link you have to access in order to get a hold of those forms that you have to complete and turn them in a timely manner. Around May and June, you're going to start accepting or declining financial aid awards. So around this time, we assume, in May 1st is decision day, so we assume you already have committed to a school, and you should already be accepting or declining their financial aid awards. So if I committed to Cal State Long Beach, I want to make sure I go ahead and accept all the grants, all the free money that they gave me, so I don't miss out on that money. If I'm going to need money to maybe stay in the dorms and I need to get a subsidized loan, I'm going to go ahead and accept that loan. So any other grants that they provide to me, maybe work study, I'll go ahead and accept it. If I see that I'm not going to need any loans, then I can just leave that blank. So just make sure you're keeping a hold of all that. Again, remember, all loans must be repaid. So you want to make sure that if you do end up accepting the loan, keep in mind that that's money that you're going to have to pay back. In June, August, once you have graduated already and senior year is over, you're going to go back to your web grants and you're going to update your high school graduation date. So if you graduate June 4th, 2021, you want to make sure you log in back to your web grants and you update that date onto your web grants. You also want to update your school of attendance. So if I decided, okay, I already committed to Cal State Long Beach, I want to let web grants know that I am going to Cal State Long Beach. That way my grants can actually go to Cal State Long Beach. If I never change that, your grants or your aid can get lost. they might end up going to the wrong school because you didn't update that school of attendance. You also want to make sure that around possibly July, August, you start thinking about opening a bank account if you have access to do so. It's highly encouraged. That way you can register or set up your e-refund. E-refund basically means instead of waiting for if you're going to get a refund for financial aid, instead of waiting for it in the mail and it's probably going to take longer, it can be deposited directly to your bank account. If you do that, if you set up e-refund, you're probably going to get your refund way faster than if you're waiting for it in the mail. So if you have access and you can open a bank account, that's something that you should be starting to think about. Maybe talking about it with your parents, if you can open a bank account with their bank or something like that. Definitely bring it up because eventually it's going to benefit you a lot once summer comes around and financial aid begins or already starts getting dispersed. You want to make sure you already set up e-refund. That way you don't have to wait around for the mail and get your FAFSA check if you're getting a refund. Rather, it's just going to go directly to your bank account.
Okay, so that was a lot of information, but very, very good and important stuff for you guys to know. Again, you guys have access to this information and these handouts to kind of keep in track and know what you should be focusing on, right? But basically some frequently asked questions that I thought were really good to address, especially that were asked on the registration form was, can I submit my FAFSA after March 2nd? So Jocelyn and Sienna have already touched on this, but yes, you can submit your FAFSA after March 2nd. However, you will be missing on that free money, such as that Cal Grant and all that other stuff. So again, it is a priority registration. So the best priority deadline, sorry. So the earlier that you can submit your FAFSA, the better. You want to make sure that you're not missing out on getting a Cal Grant just because you waited an extra day or whatever that might be, right? So again, it is in your best interest to submit before this date in order to qualify for the most financial aid possible. So the second question that we did get was, do I need to submit the FAFSA every year? So yes, while you are a college student, you need to renew your FAFSA every year. So the good thing is that, you know, if you're getting accustomed to doing it this year, especially after kind of seeing everything, you'll be able to do it a lot on your own, like maybe your second or third year in college. Essentially, all you're going to need to do is renew maybe your parents' information and your information as far as like maybe they worked more, your parents worked more, or you worked more, or you didn't work that year. It obviously it's going to change every year, but just know that you are going to need renew it every year, and the application opens in October. And again, you have until March 2nd to submit. So those dates never really change. It's just up to you to kind of get it submitted by that time. And then the third question that we did get was, what do I do if mine or my parents' income changes? And I think that this is a very significant question, especially due to everything that's going on with COVID, right? So if your family's income changes dramatically, for example, a parent lost their job, you should speak with your school's financial aid office to request a reevaluation of your aid eligibility using more current information. So let's say I decide to go to Cal State Long Beach, and I know that in 2019, my parents' income is very different from 2020. So I can speak to Long Beach financial aid office and say, hey, can I fill out an income appeal form, which again is basically to reevaluate your aid using more current income information. So they might be able to accommodate for your new circumstance, but it isn't a guarantee. You just have to be able to really advocate to, you know, get at least this petition started and see if there's any changes needed to be made. In the past, when I've worked with students, sometimes this was able to be accommodated. But again, it is a lot of additional documentation that you will need. So just make sure that you're kind of aware of that. And then the other question that we got is, should I fill out the FAFSA even if I don't think I will qualify for financial aid? I think this is a really good question. So you should still fill out a FAFSA even if you think your parents make too much money. So some schools rely on FAFSA to award scholarships, for example. So that EFC number, you're going to hear it a lot, especially like Jocelyn said. It is something that a lot of scholarships will ask for, or even some schools will ask for a student aid report, which is basically a copy of your FAFSA already completed. So filling it out will also protect you in the event like maybe financial circumstances change in the future. So let's say a parent loses their income, you can speak with the college's financial aid office to adjust their package, but they won't, you won't qualify for federal aid if you never filled it out in the first place. So they won't be able to see what you did for last year if maybe for last year you never filled out a FAFSA. So again, it's always good to kind of fill it out and see if you qualify for any aid rather than just assume that you don't and kind of be miss out on that free money. The last question that we had is, how will I receive my FAFSA money? So Jocelyn kind of talked a little bit about this as far as the timeline, right? Towards the end of the senior year. This is kind of when we explained to you a little bit of how that works. But after you complete your FAFSA, the schools that you applied to and that you listed in your application will receive your information. So once they receive your information and you get accepted to their campus, this is when they're going to offer you a financial aid award letter. Basically, it's kind of like in a job interview. When you're offered the job, they tell you, okay, this is how much you're going to make here, right? So obviously you want to make sure that you review that and you look that over before you accept any offers for any school. And then this will explain to you how much you're going to get for that academic year. So once you accept everything, it'll be processed through the school's financial aid office first. So this is where they're going to charge or take away for tuition, for maybe the fees for like ASI, which is kind of like student government and all that other stuff. And then if you get anything back, this is what Jocelyn was referring to as that e-refund, and that is going to be money for you. So it's always great if you have it in either a direct deposit, which is why we advocate for you guys to get a bank account if possible, or sometimes it'll be a check, but obviously with a check, it's going to take a little while. So it is a lot of hurdles as far as like making sure you have the right documentation, right? Making sure that you submit any forms if needed, but it is important that you have this because again, we don't want to maybe miss out on free money just because we got lost in one of the processes, right? So just make sure that you're speaking with your ETS advisor. If anything doesn't make sense, remember, this is what we're here for. We want to make sure that you guys get this money. So I believe that's pretty much it as far as like the overall presentation. So now we want to open it up for any Q&A sessions. Again, it was a lot of information. So if there's anything that isn't clear, or maybe you want to learn a little bit more about, this is your opportunity to ask any questions.
We do have one question in the chat. So someone asked, should I add a community college on my FAFSA school selection section? If I'm not sure, I'll attend a community college, but it might be my backup plan if I don't get into my dream school.
Yeah, so you should include your community colleges on there. And then something else that I wanted to include is that a lot of times we have students put their colleges in the order of like which one they want to go to the most, to not the least, but you know, like the least. So yeah, you definitely should put any colleges that you're interested in, thinking about, you should put them on there.
Yeah. Okay. If you guys have any other questions, please send them in the chat. You can send them privately if you'd like, but feel free to add them to the chat. This is your opportunity to get those questions answered.
We just got another question. The student is asking if their parents are married but did not file married, filing jointly. What is our advice for them?
You said if their parent is married, but if they're not filing married, filed jointly?
Correct, yeah. So parents are married, but they're filing separate taxes.
Does anybody want to hop in?
Eventually, if your parents are married, usually legally your parents are supposed to file jointly. There are going to be times that your parents might have to do their taxes again. It's called amending your taxes in order to be able to put that information in your FAFSA, because legally your parents should have filed jointly if they're married.
So far, we don't have any other questions in the chat box. Oh, okay. We got another question. Can I add more than 10 schools onto my school selection?
So going back to the school selection section, yes, you can add more than 10 schools, but the first time you'll add like the first 10, you'll go ahead, submit your application. Once you submit your application, you get a confirmation email and you get the process successfully email. Then you can go back into your application, take off those 10 and add the other 5 or 10 or however many, then you can add those and resubmit it and then get that confirmation in that process successfully email the second time. So you can definitely add however many you want. Just remember to always, like when you do input the new ones, you always resubmit it. Because a lot of times students, they'll just put them and then forget to resubmit it and forget to get those 2 emails.
Thank you. And then can someone go into depth about Cal Grants? How do they work? What exactly are they? Is this a separate application? I think I missed this part of the question, this part of the presentation. And how do I know if I qualify for one?
So Cal Grants, like I mentioned earlier, by submitting your FAFSA, you're basically automatically being considered for Cal Grants if you're a resident of California. That's why there's a question in the FAFSA, like if you've been living in California for more than 5 years. So there's not necessarily a separate application, but that's why you do need to complete the FAFSA before March 2nd so you can be considered for this extra grant money. Again, this is free money. The way you're considered for Cal Grant is basically if they take into consideration your GPA, your parents' income, and depending on maybe what school, what institution you're going to go to, what are you working on? Maybe you're working on a certificate program. Maybe you are working on your 4-year degree and you're going to get a bachelor's. All of these factors are considered in order to determine whether you are eligible to receive a Cal Grant. There's different types of Cal Grant. We have Cal Grant A, B, and C. And for each of these Cal Grants, there's different requirements. It's very important that you complete the FAFSA before March 2nd in order to be eligible and considered for Cal Grant. It's super, super important because again, this is free money. I cannot emphasize that more. And usually if you are eligible for a Cal Grant, you'll get an email saying, please create your web grants. And I know we talked about web grants in the timeline. This is another thing that it's like a portal for your Cal Grants. That's how I like to think about it. You're just going to put your information in and you're going to have your web grants. And that's where you're going to update your school of attendance, your high school graduation date, and all that stuff if you do end up receiving a Cal Grant award. But most important thing, just fill out the FAFSA before March 2nd to be considered for Cal Grant to begin with.
Thank you. Then we have another question. Someone asked, my brother didn't get financial aid when he applied. I think my parents make too much money. Should I even bother applying?
So I think this kind of goes with the question of the frequently asked questions. I think it's important to still fill out the FAFSA, just again, because if you're planning on applying to scholarships, because I know sometimes even if our parents are making a lot of money, I know for me, my education was kind of an expense that I needed to take care of. So I was constantly applying to scholarships. So one of the things that they will ask is for a student aid report. And again, this is kind of showing that you completed the FAFSA and it shows all of the information that you have on there. So it doesn't necessarily hurt to fill out the FAFSA just because, again, if scholarships are something that you're thinking about, you can have that on there. And let's say, for example, maybe within a year or maybe for 2020, your parents' income will change significantly. It's always important to have that on file because if they want to amend that kind of package, a school wants to amend a package that they offer you, then they'll have to kind of look back at, well, what was your FAFSA from last year? And if they don't have anything on file, then there's nothing that they can necessarily amend. So it's always kind of like an insurance policy, I like to say, to file your FAFSA just in case they, again, a lot of schools will need this type of information to even consider scholarships, even if it's not a scholarship that you apply to yourself. Sometimes the schools do a great job of matching students with scholarships, but they're gonna need proof that you submitted the FAFSA with the student aid report or like an EFC number.
And then just to add on to what Diana mentioned, I think it's important to remember that now there will be 2 people in college. So you and your brother will be in college. That's an additional expense for your parents. And usually they will ask actually on the FAFSA application if you have any other people in the household that are attending school. And if you have now your brother and yourself attending school, they might actually qualify for some type of aid as well. And then we have another question. When should I receive an email saying that my FAFSA was submitted? Do I have to do anything with this email?
Once you submit your FAFSA, you should receive a confirmation email like right afterwards. Now the process successfully email that probably won't come until it depends, but I'll just give you like a rough estimate. So between 3 to 7 days, usually it's 3 to 5 days. If you do not receive that email, then you want to talk to your ETS advisor because maybe there might have been something wrong. But usually that's the timeline. So you should get the confirmation one first, then the process successfully one. And then remind me of the second half of the question.
What do I do with this email once I receive it?
Okay, so usually some students, they'll print out their confirmation page or the confirmation email. And then since we are working virtually now, you'll also take that email and forward it to your ETS advisor, because as ETS advisors, we need to collect them for every single student that we have or every single senior that we have. So you'll forward them both emails, the confirmation and the process successfully.
Okay, and then another question that we have, can I go back and edit my FAFSA? I submitted early, but alone, and I'm not sure if I made any mistakes.
Yeah, so you can definitely go back and make corrections. So as soon as you can, open up your FAFSA and you can just review step by step if it's like your name, again, if you need to add schools or maybe something with your parents' financial information, definitely make sure to double check that because you want to make sure that you're reporting the best that you can. If for whatever reason you're able to use that data retrieval tool, like Jocelyn mentioned, it would be a good idea to do so just so that you know that it's automatically matched with what the IRS has. So of course, you can always go back and make corrections, but just make sure that you resubmit after you make those corrections so that FAFSA has the most updated application on file for you.
Thank you. And then someone asked about SAR. So what is a SAR? I received notification that my SAR is ready to review.
So your SAR is your student aid report. And again, a student aid report, it's kind of like showing everything that you filled out in your FAFSA. So it shows kind of just, again, the one document that says before you need to review and you submit, it'll show your name, it'll show your address, all that kind of stuff. So it's important to have, let's say, for example, you are applying to, I know EOP for Cal State Northridge will sometimes ask for a student aid report. And it wants some kind of proof that you submitted your FAFSA. So if you're able to, I would definitely recommend for you to download your student aid report or your SAR so that you're able to have that on file to say, hey, I already submitted my FAFSA for this past academic year and I have that ready in case whatever program or school needs it.
Okay, thank you. And then what's the website to fill out a FAFSA?
It's studentaid.gov. So you can either use that one to go directly to it, or if you just wanted to like type in Google FAFSA. But yeah, that's the one. So studentaid.gov.
One thing that I want to add with that is never go to a website that is going to charge you to do your FAFSA. If you go to a website and it says that you need to put in either like your credit card information or that it's going to charge you to do your FAFSA, that is the wrong website. So we did show you some screenshots on how that should look like. And again, it should be completely free to fill out.
I think that's all the questions that we have. I'm just checking the chat box. These are all private. Yeah, I think that's all the questions that we have. If you have any last minute questions, please feel free to stay on. And then I'll let Diana go ahead and end the session if we're ready to end.